Before we hop into this episode, I have one favor to ask of you. Over 95% of the people that tune into this podcast are not yet subscribed. And whether it's your first time here or you are a regular listener of the show, I just ask that you hit that button. We've grown over 880% this past year, and I know we are destined to impact so many people in this year of 2025. And the way we're going to do that is by you hitting that subscribe button, you sharing it with a friend that you think will get value from the show, you leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, you leave a comment, a like on this post, and that you get it out to more people, because that is the way we're going to impact more and more people. And the way that I'm going to return the favor to you is by getting more and more guests on the show to help you expand your mind, question your beliefs, and really help you open your mind up to how good this life can really get. And I'm going to do that by having interviews and conversations with exceptional people. And it's just going to get better and better. And I hope that you stick along for the journey and then you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Let's hop into the interview. What is the biggest misconception people are told about their 20s?
Well, there's a couple. One is some people might have heard, oh, your 20s don't matter. You've got all the time in the world. 30's the new 20. None of that is true. Your 20s are an amazing developmental sweet spot. They are the best time in life to get a bunch of stuff done, which we can address. The other misconception, that first one I talk about a lot in my book, The Defining Decade. Mm-hmm. The other one I talk about a lot in my most recent book, The 20-something Treatment, is this idea that your 20s are going to be the best years of your life. They're not. Sorry to be a Debbie Downer about that, but that's actually really good news. You don't want to peak in your 20s. The 20s are actually a pretty hard time of life. And I think the more people understand that's normal, the less they panic about it. And you realize that there is a lot to look forward to in your 30s and beyond.
Yeah, there was something that I heard you speak about, like the way that our 20s are framed in the media, in a sense of, we have nothing to worry about. We're in our 20s. We have this time to just have fun and do whatever we please. But then doctors are so quick to prescribe us medication and things to tell us that we're dealing with certain things. And I think a lot of in our 20s is this time where we're just told a bunch of things and are supposed to believe it.
Right.
But from your perspective, you've been doing this for 20 plus years. What do you feel like the core truth is about your 20s?
That your 20s can be just an incredibly transformational time. There's so much happening or about to happen. That's the good news from my side of the room. The bad news from your side of the room is that the core truth about your 20s is that they're the most uncertain time of life. So they're the one time in your life where you're going to wake up in the morning and you're not going to know where you're going to live in 5 years, or what you're going to do for work, or who you're going to be, or who your friends are, whether anyone will ever love you, whether you'll ever make any money. I mean, hopefully by the time you're in your 30s and beyond, you wake up and at least some of those things have been nailed down. In your 20s, none of those things are nailed down, which makes it an amazing time to get in front of all that and make it happen quickly. But for you, it's hard to wake up every day and go, oh my gosh, like, I don't know if anything's ever going to work out. We can talk about how the brain feels about that uncertainty, but the short answer is it doesn't like it at all.
Yeah, the 20s are such a weird decade, like as a whole, and there's a reason that you've stayed true to talking about it. We were just talking before about talking about college a little bit more. I mean, you're 18 to 35 mainly, but the 20s are that period of time where I think there's just nothing that people are telling us about our 20s that is actually true, other than what I've heard from the way that you speak about it. And that's why I really love what you're putting out into the world in that way. From the beginning of your journey diving into this work to now, is there something that has changed on your perspective about your 20s?
On my perspective, no. So I started doing this, I started focusing on 20-somethings 25 years ago, so around the turn of the century. So I'm from the previous century, which is just, I'm officially old, but I'm really just a Gen Xer. So Gen Xers' 20s looked really exactly like y'all's 20s, minus the social media or the technology. So what I was going to say is, what has changed? I mean, you're still human. So all the human stuff of, I need work and purpose, and I need to pay bills, and I want to find love, and I need friends, like that doesn't change. But what has changed in the last 10 years has just been sort of all the technology wrapped around that. But that hasn't really changed my perspective on what 20-somethings need to be doing and how they can be successful and what makes them happy. We just now have more tools to either help that or get in the way of that, depending on how you're using your devices.
Yeah, it shows how much life has changed, yet is also the same in so many ways.
Right.
I mean, I've
Which is
heard,
kind of reassuring when I don't think it's helpful. I mean, I get it, headlines, especially with 24-hour news and so many different competing social media sources. Everybody wants the clickbait. Instead, 20-somethings are constantly being told, it's never been like this before. This is the worst that's ever happened. This is, you've got it so bad. I mean, I'm sorry to say the 20-somethings have been rough for a while. And so the good news of that is we know something about how people get through it anyway, and that most people come out the other side and, life gets better as they go, including throughout their 20s. Most people are happier at 29 than they were at 21. So I don't think I get it. It makes good headlines to be like, no, Gen Zers are facing something no one has ever seen before, but that's really not true.
well, it's ironic to me because we have this. I think society as a whole has this belief that the 20s are supposed to be your best decade, and that's why yours is like so counterintuitive to that. But when you really put thought into it, it makes so much sense why your work makes so much sense. But why do you think that we have that belief?
I don't know. I truly don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you see it, I don't know. The stats have probably changed a little bit since I put them in the most recent version of the Defining Decade, which was 21. But something like, 80% of people on social media are between the ages of 18 and 35. Okay, fine, no problem. However, that's all you're seeing. And of course, all you're seeing is all this, like, I'm skydiving in Dubai, or, like I'm like perfecting my dorm room or whatever. And so it makes it all look like really amazing and fun. And, that everything that follows is kind of drudgery. And that's just really not how life works. And I think it helps because then 20-somethings are like, what's wrong with me? These are not the best years of my life. I'm doing it wrong. So a lot of what I do with my work is just correcting some of the myths about the 20s, whether it's about mental health or about work or love or whatever, and normalizing a lot of the struggle. And a lot of that's really hopeful work because, most of my students, clients, readers feel better, get better, their lives are better over time.
Yeah, I think the work that you're doing, I think first and foremost, giving people a space to understand that they're not alone in that, because you're right. We talk about we're going to post about the highlights. We're not going to talk about the things that we're going through when no one's around. So obviously that's what we're going to project where we think we're supposed to be. You talk a lot about the nocebo effect. It's something I've talked so much about on this podcast because I'm so fascinated by the stories that we tell ourselves and how that impacts our lives. What are you noticing in the nocebo effect? Because I don't think most people are aware of what that is to begin with, and then how it actually impacts, especially their 20s.
Yeah. So in my most recent book, The 20-something Treatment, it's specifically about young adult mental health. So the Defining Decade was sort of about 20s in general, like how to make use of them, how to engage with them. I left mental health out of that book, even though I was a clinical psychologist, because it just seemed like just a whole other book. It wasn't, a chapter wasn't really going to do it. So I wrote a whole nother book about mental health specifically. And one of the first chapters in the book is called the nocebo effect. So for your listeners who don't know what you're talking about, most people have heard of the placebo effect, which is, we think about that with sugar pills. You give someone a sugar pill and you say, oh, this is going to make you feel better. They feel better. So what we know about that is that when people have positive expectations about their future or the course of an illness, it has an influence on that. So what most people don't know is there's something called the nocebo effect, which is when people have negative expectations, whether it's about whether this medication is going to help me or whether it's whether I'm going to feel better or I'm going to get better, my life is going to get better. The negative expectations affect us too. So, what I talk about in the nocebo effect chapter is that when we tell 20-somethings who are struggling, oh, you have this disorder, oh, you have this illness, oh, these are supposed to be the best years of your life, but you're sick, then they start to have a negative story about what's going on with them of I'm dysfunctional, I'm doomed, I'm disordered, when statistically speaking, that's usually not what's happening. What's usually happening is people are experiencing normal, normative, developmentally expected stress, depression, anxiety, just as dictionary definitions, not necessarily as disorders. And they're normal. People are anxious when they don't know if they're going to get a job. They're depressed when their, partner breaks up with them. These are expected experiences. And typically they're not really disorders as much as they're feelings. And I do expect them to get better over time. It does not mean you're sort of doomed and dysfunctional. If you're stressed or depressed or anxious in your 20s, you're just having a hard time. It's not an easy 10 years.
I was speaking with George Bonanno from, I want to say, Columbia University, and
That
we
sounds
were
right.
we were speaking about diagnosis and how they lead to a lot of believing kind of what you're saying into that in such a massive way, instead of just accepting that it's a temporary experience or it's just something that we feel as humans. It feels as though nowadays we have more words for it. It's a good thing we're talking about our traumas, but it's almost to the extent that we take pride in our traumas. We want those traumas. We want to take on, because it's a part of our identity now.
Right.
Why do you think it's grown so much?
Well, I do think this is an example of how humans haven't changed, but technology has changed. So, 20 years ago, the only people who had access to words like, borderline personality disorder or, autism spectrum were people who had degrees and who went out and bought, the DSM, which is like $125, extremely boring, like medical textbook. So, it wasn't, I'm all for the democratization of information, but so now, on TikTok or Instagram or wherever, you've got people posting about, every diagnosis under the sun, which is good and not good for obvious reasons I don't need to explain. But, it has led to maybe too many, or certainly too many people saying, wait a minute, that sounds like me. Wait a minute, I have that. And, let me say this, as a 20-something, it is extremely easy to meet the criteria for many, 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 many DSM diagnoses when really you're just having a hard time. You have what clinicians would call situational anxiety or situational depression. So after a breakup, or I've got a 3-year period where I'm in a new job and I'm constantly messing up and I'm constantly anxious and stressed and I can't sleep. So you're going to check all the boxes for general anxiety disorder. That doesn't mean that that's actually a disorder that you have or that, you will always have. So, I think everybody having these terms at their fingertips, of course, could be useful, but currently it's probably less useful than people think. It's also a time of life in your 20s where you're thinking about your identity and who am I and who are my people. And so then we decide like, oh, I'm a depressed person and my people are all the other people who are suffering like I am, instead of connecting over or identifying with our strengths. We're identifying with sort of what's wrong with us or what we think is.
I think a lot of people, especially in their 20s, we are fast to point out our weaknesses because people online are telling us all these things like, hey, if you have this, this, and this, you're going to have this. Well, that's pretty easy to identify with rather than looking for the things that we actually are good at.
Right. Well, actually, I'm going to interrupt you really, really quickly. And this is super important about the young adult brain, is that the young adult, all humans are more likely to see the negative than the positive, because evolutionarily it makes sense. It's more important to avoid, coming into contact with the bear than it is, to like be sure you see the meadow of flowers or whatever.
Right.
So we're just trained to see the negative. Young adults, because they have so many uncertainties in their lives, their brain is experiencing sort of more threats and more dangers. So they're really primed for the negative. So they tend to see the negative in themselves and others in the future, in every situation. And they're also less able to kind of metabolize the negative. So they see the negative and they're like, oh no, that's definitely going to happen. My life is ruined. It's all over. It's called catastrophic thinking.
Yep.
As you get older, your brain is never going to stop thinking like, oh shit, like this might happen. But as you get older, you get better at then saying like, you know what, it probably won't. And I've been through this before. And even if it does, I'll figure it out. So you kind of have that moment, the negative, the catastrophic, but you're better at sort of working through that. Whereas the young adult brain just doesn't have enough experience to sort of talk itself off the ledge, which is sort of a lot of what I'm trying to do in my books is like, I know you're thinking the worst, but it may not be as bad as you think.
Yeah, we're full of the what ifs, the worst possible what ifs. And
Right.
it's difficult when you don't have, because I think a lot of people nowadays, we're seeing people online doing, like you said, doing the most things we've ever seen anyone do in their 20s. Because before, we didn't have an outlet to see people do these
Right.
things.
Right.
And
If they weren't in your peer group, and if they were in your peer group, then you were doing it,
right.
and whatever, you get it.
Yeah.
Proceed.
Yeah, well, you didn't have anyone to compare against, and if you did, those people were closer to you, and so I think it's a whole different kind of comparison. You kind of see a lot of people, we put people on pedestals a lot, that's for sure.
Right.
Going back to catastrophic thinking, one of the things I think is really important is, like you were speaking about, we're automatically so quick to jump to pills, jump to what we feel as though a quick solution, but long term, just a reliance in a sense. What are the main foundational skills you think people, especially in their 20s, need to develop?
Well, James, in the 20-something treatment, I have I think it's 12 chapters. You'd have to
Yep.
fact check me on that. But and I try to like hit them,
Mhm.
so it's how to think, how to feel, how to work, how to love, how to cook, how to have purpose. It's
Yep.
really sort of all, and I tried to roughly go in order, although everybody wants like an exact
Mhm.
step by step, which doesn't exist. But I started with how to think for a reason, and that's the
Yeah.
one we were just talking about, because how catastrophizing, how to deal with the negative thinking, which is normal, but you've got to find a way to sort of make room in your brain for other possibilities and other outcomes. I started with that because our brains come with us everywhere we go. They
Yep.
come with us to work. They come with us in the bedroom. They come with us to the grocery store. I mean, they're everywhere. So I started with thinking. I talked about feeling, which is very connected to thinking, of how to manage it when you have what usually follows negative thoughts are
Mhm.
negative feelings, and for people not to sort of panic about, like, okay, you're sad or you're anxious or you're stressed. No need to panic. You're not doing it wrong. This will probably pass. Just helping people really, rather than trying to like get rid of those negative feelings, to see them as like a normal response to a common 20-something experience. So, um, I'll give you an example. I have a client who, for a while, whenever she would kind of wake up in the morning and was like upset or crying, she would text her parents, and then her parents would email me.
Mm.
And then I kind of had to be like, listen, we don't need, this is not a 5 alarm fire every time she wakes up sad. Like, she's in her 20s, she's trying to find a job, she hasn't found one yet. That's a bummer. But
Right.
it's not something that we all need to be panicking about. Like, if she kind of goes about her day, it'll probably, you know, lessen. And what we really need to do is focus on helping her get a job, which is what she's sad about. So anyway, it's just kind of helping people not panic about the negative feelings that they have. But there's a whole bunch of others. You could probably name them better than I can. But how to cook is a big one.
Yeah.
I'm really big on everybody knowing how to cook for a variety of reasons. How to make decisions, that's a
Mhm.
really big one, because you're going to make a lot of decisions in your 20s. So I tried to really just lay out all the ones that come up again and again in my office.
Yeah, the thinking is definitely huge. You're right. I've always seen it as the one person you're going to be with from the moment that you're born to the moment that you die is it's you.
Right.
It's going to
It's
be
your
with you.
brain, right? Wherever you go, there you are. Yes.
Yes, and a lot of the time we feel as though that our brain is almost a separate part of ourselves because we don't know how to control it. We don't know how to tame that beast when we start thinking those catastrophic thoughts, and it's really difficult to kind of stop that from happening. I'm really grateful that I've heard so many people before I turned 20, before I got into my 20s, that solo travel is really huge. It's one of the big things that will
Hmm.
really help you create certainty within yourself in an
Oh, I did a
uncertain
lot of
world.
that. Let's talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. When I think it was last year, so when I was 20, as soon as I turned 20, I booked a 2-week trip to Costa Rica, completely
Nice.
solo, absolutely no plans whatsoever. First time out of the country, didn't speak a single word of Spanish by any means, but I did it because it was this thing where it's scary, right? Like any kind of
Right.
step outside of even just to leave the state, if you've never left the state, to go to a different country is really scary. And I think to build certainty within yourself is like the best skill that you can develop when you're within your 20s, because the world, like you said, is more uncertain than ever.
Hmm.
I know you've done some things when you were in your 20s a little bit of work where you kind of went out and tried a bunch of different things. What do you think are like
Yeah.
the most pivotal things people can do?
Well, I do want to come back to that
Please.
absolute nugget that you just said, which is building certainty within yourself. I mean,
Yep.
that's really what the 20 something treatment is all about. Everybody wants to like make the world a more certain place. You're never going to be able to do it.
Mhm.
What you can do is become more certain of yourself. Like you're certain of the skills that you have, or your ability to handle a bad day, or to get through something difficult, or to make a friend, or to find your way through a new city. Like that is the only certainty you're ever going to get. So that's really what the 20 something treatment is saying, like, stop trying to pin down the world and start pinning down yourself, in a good way. And I will say that, so my first job outside of after college was as an outward bound instructor. And
Mhm.
for people who don't know what that is, it's outdoor education. So I took mostly teenagers, troubled teenagers, which was actually tons of fun. Down rivers, over mountains,
Oh, yeah.
up climbing cliffs, like whatever. But it was such, and then in between, because I was doing that at a 10-month-a-year contract. And so the other 2 months of the year, so I lived outside 10 months a year. The other 2 months of the year, I'm not going to have an apartment or furniture or whatever. So I just traveled, often by myself, sometimes with other outward bound instructors. So literally 5 years, no roof, no nothing, except tons of experiences.
Mhm.
And I will say that it gave me a lot of things, but one thing it gave me is like every day I woke up and it was solely on me to
Yes.
get myself and, 11 other people when I was working from A to B, despite whatever happened. Maybe it was going to rain, maybe we were going to lose our way, maybe it was somebody was going to like have a meltdown, but I had to get us from A to B and work within the constraints of reality of like it's going to get dark when it gets dark, whether we're at our place or not, or if we go through all of our food before the next resupply, there's no DoorDash like bringing us some extras. And so it was such an amazing, it was a little bit like the military in a way,
Yeah.
in that it was what it was. There was no like, oh shoot, bail me out about it. It was all on me. And so I think it definitely helped me kind of very much be the person that I am today, which, I work with people, I think kind of in a similar way where I basically am trying to help them get from A to B within the constraints of reality and make that journey as amazing as possible. And, hopefully no one falls off a cliff and dies. And so it's, but that was a really good training for my brain. And I do see 20 somethings who've never had experiences like that. And they have this funny, like, why isn't someone rescuing me way
Yes.
about them sometimes,
All the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was talking to somebody one time and they were saying, oh my God, I went camping in Yosemite and it was like freezing and like we didn't have the stuff and blah, why, how did they let us do that? And I'm like, who's they? I don't like, there is no. So anyway, there's something about solo travel or being an outward bound instructor where you realize like no one is going to fix this. It's got to be you. So anyway, that's my long, I was having fun reliving those days. It's amazing. So I really recommend for everyone, if you're in college, take advantage of the abroad programs available
Yes.
to you, which will never be available to you again, and go abroad. Or you're not in school, find a way to solo travel. It's amazing. And being in other countries is, it really gets us out of our comfort zone.
100%. And I think part of it too is when you're traveling, like you said, it's kind of there's less structure, and so you're more exposed to the way that life really is, especially in your 20s. That uncertainty when you're home or when you're in college, you know what you're doing, you know everything that you have going on, you know where you're going to eat, you know what you're going to eat, all that kind of stuff. When you're in a different country, or even you went to San Francisco as well, kind of across.
I was, yeah. I went to graduate school at Berkeley, so I lived in the Bay Area for quite some time. Yeah.
I spent about 3 to 4 months in Hawaii last year, also solo.
Oh, nice.
And that was also like way far away from where I was. And so I think travel in general, I think just really teaches you a lot about yourself, but it also, I think it's really, really big in helping you realize that no one is coming to save you. That's for sure. That's for sure. When you're working with people, what do you think those beliefs are that kind of create that learned helplessness, would you say it? Would you call it?
Um, I don't know if it's, I mean, I'm just thinking off the cuff here.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure if it's learned helplessness as much as it's like not yet learned ownership. Do you know what I mean? Of
Mm,
that it's not like people have learned that they're helpless. They just haven't learned yet that like this is actually your deal. This is
yeah.
100% you. And I'm actually, that is, I think, a huge transition that happens in your 20s. The sooner the better for you, because then you'll be able to do more when you own, whether it's owning the college experience or owning your 20 something years. Like the sooner you realize these are yours. And so blow them at your peril. I mean, it's they're yours to waste, and
Mhm.
that you're not hurting anyone else. Or, I think, I have two kids who are, one is in high school and one is just out. But, I get it. I've seen it. I remember it. By the time you're done with high school, you're like, what is the minimum I can do to get the B or get the
Yeah.
A or get the pass or get out? Like, I totally get that. Like, what is the minimum I can do to check this box? Um, and then, meanwhile, there's people around you taking care of stuff that you don't have to worry about it anyway, maybe. But that ends like when you go to college or to your 20s. I mean, you can still have that approach, but you're at that point you're only cheating yourself. So if it's like, what is the minimum I can do to get through my 20s? Well, you can do that, but you're going to get the minimum return. You're going to get to 30 and be like, wow, I have the minimum. And so I don't think most 20 somethings want that. They just haven't yet realized like, oh, this is sort of, these aren't boxes to check anymore. This is my
Mm,
life, and it's only on me to kind of you know do more than just check them.
yeah. That's a great perspective. I hadn't really thought of it like that. I think that in the world today, we're almost taught to take on a perspective of learned helplessness, of just like hoping things just happen in some way. When COVID
Hmm.
happened, it was the time for, I think, for a lot of people, they had a lot of introspection, and it was the first time I really had introspection in a sense.
Hmm.
And
Hmm. Yeah.
because I wasn't going to college, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I kind of fell into
Sure.
all the work that I'm doing
Hmm.
today. But it was a time that I think for many people, they had to think about what they really wanted. And I think for so long, and especially when you're in your 20s or before your 20s, we're asked this question of, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do? Where are you going to be in 5 years from now? And I think those are really disempowering questions in a way,
Yeah.
because how am I supposed to know? Like, even
Right.
I don't know where I'm going to be physically, let alone where I'm going to be mentally or what I'm going to want
Right.
to be doing. What questions do you think that people should be asking themselves?
Well, I want to circle back in a minute to something you just said. I'm going to disagree with you. You said, I just fell into what I'm doing right now. No, you didn't. Not possible. I'll bet if I interrogated you about this, we would find out that you actually made these things happen. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
to your question of, and COVID, I do want to say COVID was interesting because I got a lot of emails over COVID.
I bet.
And and like to your point, many people were sort of stuck at home, like actually going to read a book because they have so much time, and they
Right.
finally, somebody had given them the defining decade and they're finally going to read it, so everybody starts emailing me. And I got two kinds of emails. One kind was, oh my gosh, I just read your book, I'm making all these plans, the minute the world opens up, I am going to hit the ground running. That was
Love it.
half the emails. The other half was the COVID has ruined my defining decade. I'm completely screwed. There's nothing I can do. Like, and so it's interesting of how now I can, if that person came to my office, I would help them get into the other bucket of like, no, no,
100%.
that's not what we're doing here. But, there's a lot of people out there who are not in my office or not listening to your podcast. And it's interesting how these things get filtered through the individual. How some people, some people still are like, well, I couldn't get a job during COVID 5 years ago. And so ever since I've been screwed. And
Yeah.
like, I hate hearing that. I'm not saying that COVID was awesome or anybody wanted it, but it happened. It is what it is. And that I do think there were a lot of people who kind of used it as an opportunity. I guess what we talk about in the trauma literature is to kind of think less about like what happened to me and more about like, what did I do about it? Like, how did I get through that? And it was actually really frustrating because I was trying to get a couple of op-eds in, the big legacy papers around that time of like, we need to be helping young people think less about how is this like effing me over? Not to say that it's not, but just as much about like, how am I getting through my day? Like, what am I doing in response? Because COVID is not going to be your last unexpected hardship. And it helps when you can look back and be like, you know what? I got through COVID. I got through it by doing X, Y, and Z. I can do it again. But that just was not part of the conversation as much as I think it should have been.
We're not really taught to deal with uncertainty or just anything that is considered bad that happens to us. And I think that was, for me, it was the first time I actually ever read a book, honestly, when COVID happened. Like you said, it was the first time. I took a lot of pride in never reading a book in school because I was like, I'm still getting by. I'm still
checking the boxes.
Right. I'm still exactly.
Right. Yeah.
I'm still getting by and all that kind of stuff. And then I actually started reading books, and it was the first time I realized that I could change the way I thought about myself and could change the way that I approached the world.
Nice.
And it was this
amazing
awakening where,
and that was kind of because of COVID, because you were like stuck and suddenly I got all this time. Yeah.
I never listened to a podcast before. I didn't know what a podcast was. I never read a book before. And you can see behind me, this is like half of them. And I'm so inspired by people like you and others that I didn't go to college, but I still wanted to learn from people that I'm really fascinated by.
Absolutely.
So I said, let's start a podcast and just ask the people straight up.
I mean, well, let me quickly say, you don't have to go to college to have a great life. And many, 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 many people in college right now, I'm not faulting them. I'm faulting like the system or how we're talking or not talking to college students, are not getting their money's worth. They're not making the most of it. They don't know how to do it, but they're doing it. And I'm trying to, my head is sort of thinking about that as a next project. But I guess what I'm trying to say is some people go to college and it's really transformational for them. Other people go and it's really not. And many, many people don't go to college and they find their way just as well as someone who did. So, many roads to Rome. And I'm curious about yours.
Yeah, so my entire life, I would tell people, like my sister brought this up to me and I never really thought about it recently. My entire life, I played baseball. And right in about 10th grade year, when COVID happened, we were told we were going to go home for 2 weeks.
Right.
Never went back to school.
Yep.
And I tore my labrum. And so baseball wasn't in my college future anymore. And I, funny enough, was going to go to Virginia Tech. I went down there for a camp. So I went down there and tore my labrum, realized I wasn't going for baseball anymore. And so I never thought about a major. Like college genuinely never made sense to me. I was going for baseball.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I got into, I almost got into real estate and then got into coaching and podcasting and this whole world. But I think the difficult thing for people that are in college is they don't know what questions to ask, and they don't really, and they're also, college is a lot of, and the reason I didn't really like school much was you're learning a lot, but you're not experimenting a lot. So you're not really seeing where your skills lie. And I think when you're doing that, you don't really have a way of figuring out where your strengths are. And that's why we lean towards, this is my weaknesses. And this is something to identify with, because I'm not sure what my strengths are.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, there's a lot kind of, I think, to tinker with or more with the college experience. But I mean, I do think that what's happening largely between, 18 and certainly 25, but then I would say probably another 10 years too, is it's really the first time. You were saying like, oh, I'd never really reflected before. Totally normal that no one reflects before about, the age of 18 or so, which is, it's interesting because I, the age group that I work with, I'm often the first person to hear about something. So like someone will say, oh, my dad was an alcoholic and I've never told anyone this before, and they're 20. And many people think like, why is that? Well, it's because for a variety of reasons, including brain development, people don't really reflect a lot on their life before young adulthood. So it's completely normal to be like, I'd never really thought about what I was good at. But it's such important work, whether it happens through a book or on a podcast or a class you take or some app you get. to start spending more time not just thinking about what are all the bad things about me, what if my life goes wrong, what if nothing works out, but to think about what are the good things about me? How did I get through COVID? What are my strengths? What do I do well? What if my life goes well?
Yes.
What does that look like? So what should I do now to get to that place? And it's certainly not about like, where do you want to be in 5 years? Because to your point, on average, 20 somethings have 9 jobs between the ages of 18 and 35.
Yeah.
And most end up in jobs or roles or positions they'd never heard of when they were 20. So it's like asking a 20-year-old, like, who are you going to marry? And, they still have 1,000 more people to meet. It doesn't
Right.
make any sense. And so, I think thinking less about, not nailing down the future, but, having dreams of like, what does a good life feel like to me? Like, what are my imagination, about that? But also like, what do I know so far about what I do well? Because you've been alive for 21 years, like you have data, you just may not realize it.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people have a safe space to like. That's why you're the first person. Is at least my perspective is they don't have a safe space to be vulnerable, or at least they don't feel they have a safe space to be vulnerable, and so they don't feel as though they can talk about those kind of things that they probably never told anyone. And I say it, I say it often is that it doesn't matter who it is. It can be a stranger. It can be someone very close to you. You need to release the things that you're keeping inside and just tell at least one person because it just can't be within you because then it just builds and builds and that story continues to kind of decrease your likelihood of looking for the good in yourself, I think.
Right. And, if it's, I'm all for have it be another person. And I really think that person, statistically speaking, probably shouldn't be a therapist because
Yeah.
they're expensive and not all as good as others and hard to access and not sustainable or scalable. But so I'm all for make that person a friend, a family member, a professor, a mentor, a boss, like whatever. But at a minimum, you could write it down in a journal or
Yes.
record it to yourself on your phone. And it's amazing what people learn just by saying things out loud or, putting it into words. I think a lot of people imagine, because I've been doing this so long, I can like see into the like brains or souls of my 20 something clients or students. I cannot. All I know is what they tell me, but them articulating it is often they'll say like, wow, now when I say that out loud, I can't believe I'm thinking that. Or now when I say that out loud, I realize that's not the way I should be thinking. Or, maybe I see something because I've heard something similar 1,000 times by now. But it's often just them articulating, and I'm just going off of what they're telling me. I can't see things that they're not saying.
100%. My hand will get tired if I write for like 3 sentences because after high school, I haven't really written much anymore. I'm typing or something like that, but I'll record voice memos to myself and listen back. Such a powerful thing. I want to take a step back to something you were talking about earlier that I think is, I want to hear your perspective on. When we think of the life that we want to create for ourselves, I think more now than ever, people don't really have goals for what they want. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of the people that I'm coming in contact with is they don't really want a specific job. They just want to be safe financially, emotionally, spiritually, whatever that means. But they don't really have like, oh, I don't want to be a astronaut or I don't want to be something like that anymore. Do you find that that's also happening?
I do, but I think it's for the reasons we were talking about that, unlike, let's say, 75 years ago, before my time, by the way, women could be nurses or teachers or, that might have been about it. And, men who went to college could maybe be like doctors or lawyers or whatever. And, if you didn't go to college, you were going to be like a machine worker or a shopkeeper. It was just much more straightforward. Now it's like, I'm not saying there's a tyranny of choice because I don't know that they're all choices, especially if we're not doing anything about attaining these, but they're options, I think people feel overwhelmed. And that's why I say, don't worry about what it is you're going to be. Just, start to figure out, I think the 3 kind of pieces, the three circles that create the Venn diagram is, well, what do I like? I don't mean it's got to be your passion. I think that's like way overrated because people are like, oh no, I don't have a passion. I can't do anything. But, what do you like? What are you good at? And then what's going to pay the bills to the extent that is important to you. So for some people that may be, hey, I want to rent 1,000-foot bungalow when I'm 40. To other people, it may be I want whatever. But I think that you can know that, so you are going like, you know what? I love helping people. I love talking to people. I love learning from other people and letting other people know what I've learned and what I've figured out. So just do that and then do that for a year, see what you learn, see which parts you like more and less, keep doing the ones you like, try to get rid of the ones you don't like. And that journey refines itself. But there's no way right now you could tell me what you're going to be doing when you're 35, or you could say it, you'd probably be incorrect. Unless it's like, oh, well, I want to go to med school and be a heart surgeon. It's like, okay, well, that's a relatively predictable path if you want to put the work in. But for most of us, it's like, when I started grad school, I had never heard of, and there was no such thing as, like specializing in 20-somethings.
Right.
And so I didn't think I wanted to do that, never heard of it, never thought about it. And then in the process of saying, like, I think I do like psychology. I do like helping people. I like that, meaningful one-on-one interaction. I learned that 20-somethings are really where all the action is. So that's how that happened.
You have to try things to figure out what you like. The idea of the passion thing is like because I've been doing this for about 4 years, and when I go on podcasts a lot, and when I go on podcasts, they often ask me, I'm the youngest person they've ever had on, where are you going to be in 5 years? What's next? And I'm like, I couldn't tell you where I'm going to be physically next week. Like, I know I'm going to be in Colombia next week, but after that, I don't know where. I don't know. So I couldn't tell you.
Right.
I could tell you, like you said, but I have absolutely no idea, and I wouldn't want to know. I think
Right.
we think that we want certainty, but if we know what's going to happen, we have nothing to be excited for.
Right. And you feel like it's decided. It's
Exactly.
I mean, it's like you want to feel like I'm deciding it and I could change it. There's a proverb. It's in the updated edition of the Defining Decade. And it's, a lot of my work is a lot about like, hey, don't forget about your future. Don't just think in the present. It's sort of like that balancing that future thinking or forward thinking with present thinking. However, there's a great proverb in the book that goes like, take care of the minutes and the years will take care of themselves, which means, the best way to prepare for the future is to build yourself up now. And then like whatever it ends up being, you'll do well. So it's, it's not quite the same as present thinking of like, oh, cheeseburgers and vacations. It's more of like, how do I build myself up? And really kind of take care of the minutes in a way that I feel good about. And then I'll have what I need when the future comes.
Yeah, I think in life overall, it's a really great thing to have a bias towards action, but especially in your 20s when you're trying to figure out what you want to do, sitting in indecision and letting analysis paralysis take over your life, because there are a bunch of options, maybe not things that are actually an option for you, but there's a bunch of different things that we think that we could do. It paralyzes us into thinking, well, I don't know what I want to do, so I'm just going to do nothing. And that's always the worst possible outcome. Is there something that you've realized that people value in their 20s that they realize later in their life doesn't have much value, at least to them, from your experiences?
I don't know. I think most people in their 20s have a lot more spare time than they realize. And I think they need that, or they think they want that, or all I know is like I have no spare time now, but I don't care because I like everything that I'm doing. So like, what do I need the spare time for? I mean, it is like last night I snuck in an hour I wasn't expecting to have, and I read a chapter of a book I didn't think I was going to get to yesterday, and I was psyched about that. That's good. But I'm not saying I don't travel and go on vacations and whatever. I guess what I mean, just like downtime where you just do absolutely effing nothing. you don't really have much of that, or I hope you don't. I frankly hope you don't have much of that after your 20s, because I hope your life is really busy and rich and you've got tons of stuff going on that's filling up all your time. Like, that's actually what you want. So I think sort of this goal of like time to do nothing, I'm not sure that's like as awesome as people think it is.
I think what people want is choice, because it's not like the idea of retirement to me doesn't resonate.
But
I
no, God, what a nightmare to like, what would I do? Sit around and watch television? I mean, yeah, no thanks. Yeah.
that's exactly what I think. And because yeah, when you're consumed or you have this compulsion to work on things that you're inspired by, I mean, whatever you're not giving into the world, you're kind of like losing in yourself. That excitement goes away, and I think you should be putting it into the world. And now that's what the difficult thing is. People, they want the choice to be able to do what they want, but really what they really want is something that inspires them to want to do the thing that they want to do.
Right,
I've been saying this for a while, where with the podcast, I have more energy after than I do before. And so why would I ever want to get away from that? That's what you're trying to seek, those kind of things.
Well, and I think that's you're doing a good job of articulating what I wasn't doing a good job of saying, which I guess is just sort of like downtime isn't what people think it is. Like, it isn't as like recharging and motivating and like the holy grail as people think. Is that often we go and do things and we're like, man, I feel better than before I did that. And I remember when I was first selling the first edition of the Defining Decade to publishers. This would have been like 2010 when it was being sold, and then it didn't come out until 2012. But anyway, I remember I wasn't a 20-something, but it's a very 20-something thing to think that I wanted to get the size of an advance so that I could just like kick back and write my book, like full time. Like, I just want to, I've never written a book before, but y'all pay me to just full time write my book. And a big shocker, they did not pay me that kind of money. An unknown, untried author to quit my day job. But one editor was like, I don't want you to quit your day job. Your day job is where you're like talking to people and getting fired up about like, you're wasting your time, or you're going the wrong way, or shoot, somebody needs to do something about this. And she was totally right. And ever since then, I mean, I do write more full-ish. Well, I don't write full time for this reason, but being an author is now like an enormous chunk of the pie of what I do. But I have never, ever quit the other stuff that I do because it gives me energy. It keeps me engaged. It gets me thinking. I talk to people like you, and people say things and I'm like, oh man, I hadn't thought about that. I need to include that. Or so anyway, I think as a 20-something, I have met more than one 20-something that's like, I just want to go to a cabin and write my book. And the me now is like, please don't do that. Like, stay engaged with the world and write your book. I mean, I wrote The Defining Decade. I'm embarrassed to say what percentage of that I wrote at the bounce and play while my kids were in like the ball pit or whatever, because I had a lot going on, but that's what really kind of kept the urgency and kept me fired up.
Yes. I think, first off, the last thing that 20-somethings need is isolation. That's for sure. And on top of that, I think it makes so much sense that you stick with everything else that you're doing, because when you have the free time, this is one thing I don't think people realize. When I became an entrepreneur, I realized I don't want as much free time as I think I want, because then I have a billion different things that I could always be doing. And then I never really know what the priority is, because I don't have other things that are giving me that structure to be able to prioritize.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. There's a really good TED Talk, and you would love it, James. And I'm going to assign this to you, which is, I'm certain you will do your homework. And I'm not going to be able to think of it, so I may have to email it to you later, but you could also just Google it and Google will know. But it's this guy. He actually gave his talk the same year as I did. So that's how I met him and saw it. But it was really, really cool talk. He was an artist, but something happened with because he was doing so much like dot pieces that he like messed up his hand and then became like limited in the kind of work that he could do. Just Google that much and they'll figure it out. But it was a really, really brilliant talk. And it was similar to mine in a way, because they were both about how limits help us focus and have urgency. And I think that's where kind of replacing this like 30's a new 20. It's like, no, it isn't. You do not have all the time in the world to become who you want to be and do what you want to do and travel where you want to travel and meet the person you want to meet. Like, you don't have all the time in the world. And I think when people perceive those limits, that's where the urgency comes from. So it was actually a really cool talk about that. I think you would like.
I definitely would. Are you aware of Oliver Berkman's work by chance?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
He wrote 4,000 Weeks. He just came out with Meditations for Mortals, but he wrote for The Guardian, and one of the best selling books of all time when it comes to like self-improvement. 4,000 Weeks
sweet.
is.
Oh, nice.
But he talks about like embracing your limitations in such a way, because that allows you to focus on the right things and the things that actually have meaning to you, rather than a bunch of different things that don't really have much value in the long term.
Well, I'll tell you another one. We're giving your listeners, all kinds of other suggestions after they read my books. Of course. At first, they need to read The Defining Decade and the 20-something Treatment. But then, of course, the classic, which I'm sure you read, is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. That is the most brilliant bait and switch in publishing history, because the title appeals to all those people that are like, awesome, this book is going to tell me how I can not care and have a great life. And the book is really about, sorry, dude, you got to care about something. Don't care about the stuff that doesn't matter, but you really got to care about, what's important to you or whatever. It was genius.
Yeah. Incredible book too. Incredible. I listened to the audiobook and I was just like, there were so many hitters from that book where I was just like, it's an amazing quote. Okay. One last question I ask every guest. My question to you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
Ooh, yikes.
Yeah.
I suck at these last questions on all that. These should be abolished from podcasts. I'll
put some thought into that.
What belief am I currently unlearning? I don't know. Shoot.
I can frame it a different way if you'd like.
Yeah, do that.
What's something right now that you're working through?
I don't know if I'm unlearning this, but I will say that this is not going to resonate with your audience at all, but maybe it'll help them relate to their parents. But my kids, I have two kids. One is a freshman in college and one is a senior in high school. And I don't think I ever thought like, oh no, empty nest, what a nightmare. What am I going to do when my kids go to college? Because obviously I have a pretty rich life. But that is, speaking of cultural myths, that is a thing. Like, there's no end to these articles about like empty nest and what do you do when your kids are gone? And so I'm experiencing that. I'm kind of clearing my calendar in a way that I haven't done before, just kind of being like, you know what? For the next year, for the first time in 20 years, I'm going to have no kids in my house. I can work more from anywhere than I ever have been able to, which has actually been pretty flexible. And I'm going to not put a lot on the calendar and just kind of, other than writing, which is always on the calendar, and kind of like see what happens. So I'm really sort of like opening myself up to all the cool things that can happen because my kids are in college, rather than being like, oh no, my kids are in college. Like, I'm super happy for them. I love 20-somethings, so I'm very happy my kids are going to be 20-somethings. And I'm really excited of like what all is next for me.
Yeah, I'm excited too. That spontaneity is going to be fun. I bet it'll really impact your writing in a really cool way.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
I hope so. Well, this has been awesome, James. I'm impressed. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Beautiful.